We're very glad you're here. What a beautiful day. We have been blessed on, we've done more sesquicentennial days than any park in the National Park System, I suspect. And every single one of them has been beautiful weather. Probably messed us up by saying that, but it is absolutely true. My name is John Hennessy. I'm the chief historian at the park. Beth Karnitsa and I, one of our historians, will be doing the tour for you today. Beth is going to lead the way, by and large. Before we get going, just a few things. Be kind to our intrepid volunteers. These events simply do not work without them, and we're very grateful to have them along with us on all of these events. They help make them work better. If this walk today is flat, we're going to bushwhack if you choose. You don't have to bushwhack at one point, but we're going to follow this trail that we're on all the way to the Rock Road, and we're going to come back, just as the Confederates did on the afternoon of May 6th, 1864. And we'll narrate the way. It is flat largely. There are stumps in the middle of the trail, so please be careful and watch your step as you go. I almost fell on my face rather ungracefully in front of 100 people the other day, so be careful about that. If at any point you feel any kind of unease, distress, let one of us know, and we will take care of you as quickly as can. For those of you who were not on this morning's tour, we apologize for being a little bit late. I think those of you who were on this morning's tour are probably glad we're a little bit late, because the morning tour was an arduous trek that has rarely been done by the public, and the folks who were on that this morning did really put out 2.73 miles, somebody measured, through the woods without a trail except for the last few hundred yards. So we are heading into the wilderness. Just a couple of observations from me before I give it over to Beth. One of the things that has struck me about this year is that our winter in Virginia this year was very similar to the winter in Virginia in 1864. And in fact, the foliage was late coming out in 1864, and we might only be a day or two ahead of the foliage in May of 1864. So the wilderness was not in full bloom on May 6th in 1864. Probably the foliage was probably very much like what you see here today. We're going to talk a good deal about the wilderness as we go along. Many of you have probably already heard about it today, but there is no place in the entire Civil War, landscape of the Civil War, where the nature of the battlefield, the landscape of battle, did more to shape the nature of the human experience in here, without question. And I think with some of the things we're going to do today and places we'll go, you'll get a real good first-hand idea of why that was so. So with that, I want to turn it over to Beth. She's going to be the primary talker today. I'm doing most of the color commentary. But as we go along, if you have questions, or again, if you have any distress or you feel like you need to go back, we will make arrangements for that to happen. And so please don't be shy about that at all.
All right, so my first big question, can everybody hear me? Is anybody having any trouble? I suppose if you are, maybe you can't hear me to let me know. But thank you all for coming out and joining us. As John said, my name is Beth Karnitsa, and I do appreciate you all coming out on our tour, especially those of you who just did the 2.7 miles. Who all was just on the last tour? All right, that's a lot of you. So do bear with us. There will be a little bit of repetition from things that you heard earlier this morning, and especially if you were with us at sunrise, even a little bit more repetition of that, but we'll try to move through that quickly and get to the main action that we're focusing on today, which is going to be the aftermath of Longstreet's blank attack. So to bring us really to that point, let's talk a little bit about what brings battle to the wilderness. John was talking about how dramatically the landscape here impacts how the war goes, how this battle is fought, and we are, in fact, in the dense wilderness of Spotsylvania County. This is exactly the sort of place that Robert E. Lee hoped to pin Ulysses S. Grant down in and the Army of the Potomac in the spring of 1864. A place where numbers, artillery did not matter as much, where Lee could actually use the forested landscape to his advantage, this tangled woods he wanted to use. So he succeeds in pinning Grant down, largely because Grant and the commander of the Army of the Potomac, George Meade, want to strike at Lee wherever they're able to find him. So Lee is willing to fight in the wilderness. That's just fine with Grant and Meade. They're more than happy to fight here, more than happy to accommodate Lee's desire to fight, wherever it is. So the Army gets pinned down on May 5th, 150 years ago, yesterday. How many of you were on our tours yesterday? All right, so I don't need to spend too much time, I don't think, going over that fighting either. Suffice to say, the fighting on May 5th ends largely in stalemate on the two primary fronts of this battle. We're on the southern end of the fighting, here along the Plank Road. By the way, for those of you who are hoping to orient yourselves on your maps right away, if you want to hold the Plank Road, which you should see labeled the Orange Plank Road, cutting right through those red blocks, the Orange Plank Road is the trail we are paralleling. So it is the road that most of you probably came in on, the Orange Plank Road. And looking ahead, down the trail we're about to head to would be where the Union forces are. Farther down there is the intersection with the Brock Road, which will be eventually where we're heading. But here we are on the southern end of the fighting. Here on May 5th, Robert E. Lee finds himself in a bit of a difficult position by the evening. Union attacks have been extremely heavy, very powerful. His men are battered and about on the point of breaking, but he decides not to entrench his men that evening because he's waiting for fresh reinforcements from James Longstreet. On the northern end of the field, Union attacks go across Saunders Field. I'm sure most of you were with us, it looks like, at Saunders Field yesterday. And that fighting also ends in stalemate. So the next morning, both sides are hoping to renew the attacks, renew the fighting, and hopefully turn this situation to some advantage. Here on the southern end of the field, one of the main objectives for both sides is to hold the Brock Road and Plank Road intersection. So I already mentioned the Plank Road, one of the main east-west roads in the area. It intersects at the end of our journey with the Brock Road, which is the main north-south road. It's critical for the armies, for each army, to hold that intersection for different reasons. For Grant, it's important that he holds that road because it's his way south, and his goal is, of course, to win some form of victory here and then move south. Even if he can't win a victory here, he still wants to move south. It's important that he holds the Brock Road. For Lee, it's important for the very same reason, in many ways, that he wants to block Grant from going south. So he would love to reclaim that intersection from the Union forces. So on the morning of May 6th, 150 years ago this morning, the Union forces are going to be the first to start battle here. They'll attack A.P. Hill's men, who I mentioned did not entrench the night before, were not very well prepared to meet this attack, and crumble under its pressure. Those of you who were with us at sunrise this morning have already heard that story. As A.P. Hill's men go streaming back to the rear of the Confederate lines, James Longstreet's First Corps arrives on the field, a full third of the Confederate Army, reinforcing that position, and is able to push back the Union attacks. Once they've sort of rocked the Union forces back on their heels, James Longstreet is going to launch a flank attack. So he, and those of you, again, who just marched that 2.7 miles with us are very familiar with the route that he took, but he'll utilize an unfinished railroad cut farther to the south of us in order to, and out of ammunition as we were by this time, to get across the parapet. That would be the parapet and the earthworks that exist back at that intersection. To get across the parapet, and after a short rest in the hollow ground to the rear, to reform and be again ready for action. So this shows also the importance, and you'll catch us all talking an awful lot about the importance of earthworks and the new dynamic that the earthworks and the field fortifications that both of these armies are now rapidly digging will play in the campaign at large. but especially here. You see that these men need a place to form, and as Galloway puts it, their one hope is to get to those earthworks where they think they can rally and reform, where they know they've got a place of safety and security, where they are able to rally and then turn to meet any further Confederate attacks. As soon as these men reach the intersection in their mild terror, they will start to improve those works. They realize what could be coming next. If they're running for the intersection and running for those works, the Confederates may well be right on their heels. So they'll immediately start to improve those earthworks. Theodore Lyman, one of Meade's staff officers, is watching these men stream back. He said they were not running, nor pale, nor scared, nor had they thrown away their guns. They had fought all they meant to fight for the present, and there was an end of it. If there's anything that will make your heart sink and take all the backbone out of you, it is to see men in this condition. It's an important difference. We often think of these men as routed and in utter chaos. These men are in a more quiet chaos. They've simply decided that they've had enough, and they're going to the rear. One of them, Wilbur Fisk of the 2nd Vermont, wrote, "I had got among a lot of stragglers, and I began to consider myself a straggler too." You don't actually want to consider yourself a straggler if you're a soldier, but Fisk is willing to admit that he is in fact being a straggler at this point. So he said, "And I began to consider myself a straggler too. At any rate, I was shamelessly demoralized. I didn't know where my regiment had gone to, and to be candid about it, I didn't care. I was tired almost to death and as hungry as a wolf." Anyone who's just on the tour can sympathize. "I had been fighting to the best of my ability for Uncle Sam's Constitution, and now I thought it of about as much importance individually to pay a little attention to my own. My object was to find a safe place in the rear, and in spite of revolvers, or swords, or entreaties, or persuasions, I found it. My patriotism was well nigh used up, and so was I, till I had had some refreshments." But remember what Lyman had said about this, that if there's anything that will make your heart sink and take all the backbone out of you, it is to see men in this condition. Because men who are afraid, who have just been scared into running to the rear, can often be rallied. If they can find a good place to rally and stop, and they feel a little more secure, they can stop and fight. But this quiet demoralization is a whole lot more difficult to confront. You notice that Fisk doesn't write about necessarily being terrified. He writes that he's simply had enough. He's hungry, he's tired, and he's done all that he's going to do for now, and that's all there is to it. And that is, to these soldiers, and especially to their officers, trying to get them to rally and stand, perhaps an awful lot more dangerous. But the officers are going to do their utmost to try to rally these men, especially back at the intersection, to try to get them to stick. Captain George A. Bowen of the 12th New Jersey halted his men at the breastworks. He wrote, "While here, General Hancock and staff rode along this road, each with as much ammunition as they could carry on their saddles, throwing it out to the men, and telling us to hold this position at all hazard, not to try to hunt our regiment or brigades, but stay there and whip them as we had at Gettysburg." So here the officers are trying to make an impression with themselves by riding along the line, passing out ammunition, encouraging the men to stay, to hold these earthworks. By having an existing line, these men do have a place to rally, they have a place to form, and hopefully they will be able to form there and stand. Though it's important, again, to note their extreme level of demoralization. One man from the 124th New York rallied his men right along the road we're about to take. So the path that we are taking right now is a nicely raked trail, actually, but it is following the route of an old woods road trace. We don't really know much about this road, except that we are fairly confident that it was here during the war. But we will be following that all the way to the Brock Road, and here's some men who were rallying right along this road. He said, "About the time the enemy's bullets ceased falling among us, we came to a wood road, which ran obliquely across and nearly parallel with our line of retreat. The fleeing multitude, no longer spurred by bullets, soon slackened its pace, and here on this road I again directed Corporal Edwards, who now constituted my entire command," that's a bad sign, "to loosen his colors to the breeze, and to my unspeakable delight the men began to flock in from the woods on either side." So we do actually have a bit of a rallying point, and in the aftermath of Longstreet's attack, the Union Army is going to work to reform along those breastworks along the Brock Road. And as they're filing into place, their officers are encouraging them, they're getting them to stick, and preparing them to confront what may be coming out of the woods at them next. At this time, or shortly thereafter, Ambrose Burnside, many of you perhaps have heard about the saga of Ambrose Burnside on the Wilderness battlefield, finally arrives in the place that he is supposed to be. So the plan for Ambrose Burnside, who is commanding at this stage the 9th Union Army Corps as a separate entity from the Army of the Potomac. It's a very complicated sort of command structure, but you have Ulysses S. Grant in command of all Union armies, George Gordon Meade in command of the Army of the Potomac, but technically Ambrose Burnside, who most of you will probably recognize from Fredericksburg, ranks Meade in that he's been an Army commander before Meade. But nobody actually really wants Ambrose Burnside to take command of the Army again. So he's operating somewhat independently. Grant is coordinating him, and the plan for Burnside on May 6th is that he will cut between the two wings of the Army, between the northern and southern branches of this fight, and strike the Confederate flank first thing in the morning. So he is supposed to be coordinating with Winfield Scott Hancock and the 2nd Corps in their initial assaults at 5 o'clock in the morning. Burnside is not there for a multitude of reasons involving traffic on the roads, the wilderness terrain itself, and a brigade of North Carolinians. But he finally arrives in place about 2 p.m. If you're doing the math and he was supposed to arrive at 5 a.m., you know he is woefully late. But he has orders to attack, and so he immediately launched an attack on Longstreet's northern flank. However, in his reduced capacity, because he's lost a couple of units along the way, and unsupported by Hancock, who is at the moment still trying to rally his men and organize them along the Brock Road, Burnside's attack ends up being unsuccessful. But now that Burnside is in place, it seems like an excellent opportunity for the Union forces to strike back in the aftermath of Longstreet's flank attack. So let's give Hancock's Corps a little bit of time to reorganize and rally, and then a new attack is planned for 6 p.m. The Union forces will then send Daniel Lazier's brigade, branch of the 9th Corps, out in front to sweep out in front of the Union lines along the Brock Road to push out any remaining Confederates that might be in their front. Lazier's brigade, as you can imagine, was not very thrilled about the assignment. You're going to go out into the woods and sweep to see if there are any Confederates. They were not thrilled. But the good news for Lazier's brigade and for the Union soldiers here is that the Confederates are facing a similar level of disorganization. So you can see, if you take a look at your first map, May 6th morning, Longstreet's flank attack. This is showing you, to some degree, Longstreet's hitting the flank of the Union Army. As he does so again, remember that attack happens at 11 o'clock in the morning. He rolls up Hancock's men, but you can see that Longstreet has men along the Orange Plank Road and also along the unfinished railroad cut. And even once they attack and roll up the Union flank, they're going to still be in a bit of chaos, right? Because you have some units who are facing down the road, some units who are facing north. So you've got units in a very confused state. What's more, those of you who were with us on the tour before, you heard the story of James Longstreet himself being wounded. Longstreet is fairly grievously wounded, although he will recover. He is not able to participate in the rest of the battle, has to be removed from the field. He is commanding the Confederate 1st Corps here. Without the Confederate 1st Corps' commander, who's going to lead the men? Who's going to reorganize the men after Longstreet's flank attack? Longstreet, those of you who were on the program, heard that Longstreet is planning and really attempting to launch a second flank attack that would reach down to the Brock Road and dislodge those Federals from the earthworks that they are now rallying in. And had he been able to carry it off in the immediate aftermath of his attack and found those demoralized and somewhat chaotic Union forces, he might have had some great success. But with Longstreet down, there's a bit of a void of command. And so the 1st Corps is rather disorganized. Major General Charles Field, one of Longstreet's division commanders, wrote of the disorder at that point, saying that there were two groups of Confederates, as you might be able to tell from your map, one perpendicular and the other about parallel to it, that it being the plank road. Neither could move without interfering with the other. So the Confederate forces need a firm hand to step in, reorganize, and then launch another attack to capitalize on their earlier success. And Field will initially take command, but interestingly, Richard Anderson of the 3rd Corps is the ranking officer. And so he will end up stepping into Longstreet's shoes and needing to take command on the field here. But Anderson doesn't know about Longstreet's plan. He doesn't know what the details are, let alone what he should be doing with it. He's new to the Corps. He's fairly new to the battlefield situation, and he simply does not know how to carry out Longstreet's vision. He's not in a position to do so. And so Lee, who feels compelled to carry forward Longstreet's momentum, but does not have the proper commander in place in order to do so, finds himself in a bit of a pickle. He needs to take the offensive, right? Because he's got demoralized Union forces in his front. He needs to capitalize on that, but he has no proper means of doing so. And so his orders to attack are actually a frontal assault. So instead of the flanking attack that Longstreet had proposed and had actually been arguing to continue even after he's wounded, trying to choke out the words that the attack should continue, those visions or dreams simply crumble in the void of his command or his loss. So Lee instead decides again to launch this frontal assault at 4 p.m. Why on earth would you not launch a frontal assault at this stage in the game? What are the Union forces behind? Earthworks that they immediately started to strengthen as soon as they rallied back in that position. So Lee is proposing to launch a full-on frontal assault of his men through these woods against an entrenched position. To us, it doesn't sound like a very good idea. The only thing that you can really consider as some kind of consolation is to perhaps reread those Union accounts of demoralization and think, well, maybe it won't take much. If we can just push them out, if they're just still in that disorganized chaos, we might have a good chance. But I mentioned that the attack is scheduled for 4 p.m. If Longstreet's attack hit at 11 a.m., these Union forces have had a lot of time to rally, a lot of time to have the refreshments that they wanted to have, a lot of time to strengthen their works. And so, if you factor in the amount of time that has passed, I have to ask, how would you all feel about stepping into these woods for a frontal assault against the Union position? Any volunteers? Wow, okay, that's a pretty strong statement. With that, I'll ask if John has anything to add before all right, then we're going to move on to our next step.
We have this image of the wilderness being one thing. And I bet all of you have it, and those of you who were out with me the other day, we talked about this a little bit. The wilderness was not simply a single type of vegetation. It was an area that had been used and misused or not used at all in hundreds of years by humans. And so there were areas that had been cut down within, especially close to the roads, that had been cut down to build the plank road in the last 12 to 15 years. And you know what a forest is like after 12 to 15 years. It's pretty ugly. And of course, most of the soldiers who encountered this forest, at least at first, encountered it along the road. But you also see plenty of descriptions of the wilderness as being rather typical woods, where the distance you often couldn't see 50 or 60 yards. Well, that's about what you can see in the woods today. 50 or 60 yards. So there were areas where it was cut, it was that tangled, choking mass, and we're going to go past one of those areas on our way through here. But there were other areas that were probably very much like it is today. I just wanted to stop here and let everybody close up with the group. We do have some folks who need handouts. Linda Bear, their handout person. Did she quit on us? She lost in the woods?
You want one?
Oh, does somebody else have them? Oh,
Hey, buddy.
they're back in the back. If you need handouts, if you could just kind of walk around the group and
I can send them back here.
make them available to anybody who needs them.
You want if you want.
Just off to our north here is the site of Longstreet's wounding. As you look at your maps, let me orient you to the maps a little bit here, just for a second. If you hold it, the top of this map is looking west. I forgot to put a north arrow on it. So north is to your right. And the woods road that we're walking along here is marked on this map. So that's the route that we're going to take the whole way, just south of the plank road.
One man said, fighting in the forest here, he said, in all this wood fighting, our troops seem to have been greatly alarmed whenever the noise of a contest to the right or left told them that there was fighting in the rear. Such noises seem to have caused more disturbance than a foe directly in front. And one of the great effects of the wilderness was limiting sight, forcing people to use other senses to interpret what was going on around them. And also, as it invariably happens when people don't have all the information they need, they fill in the blanks themselves. And when you're in a frightening situation, you tend to fill in the blanks with frightening stuff. And so, a line threatened from the left or rear here would often, that fear would radiate down the line before anyone could see it. And you see many accounts of that. And this is the area, Longstreet's flank attack struck right out here, several hundred yards off to our south here. The Union lines, there are a couple Union lines here, one out in this direction, one back in this direction, and these lines were just kind of rolled up that day. And this is where the retreat that Beth was talking about, this rather disorderly retreat, in fact, one of the more rapid retreats in the history of the Army of the Potomac, this is where it began. One man in the 74th New York, these are men, many of them who fought in the wheat field and the peach orchard at Gettysburg. He wrote, there was a heavy musket firing on our left and rear, and we could soon tell that our men were being driven by the change in the direction from which the sound of the firing came. Again, here are men filling in the blanks with their other senses. And then, of course, they transitioned to their imagination beyond that. It gradually got nearer and nearer in our rear. Our men shook their heads at each other, knowing very well that there was something wrong. So these Union soldiers are facing this way, and they're hearing sounds in this direction. The approach of fire, of gunfire. And they know, excuse me, or they sense that they are in trouble. One colonel of the 3rd Maine Infantry yelled, get out of this, every man for himself, which was not an order from the regulation book, by the way. I ran a few rods and caught my foot in a crotchet stick, and I went at least 20 feet before I hit the ground. Many of you probably tripped on some of these routes and such on your way through. It was a common thing for these soldiers. And as they went, of course, they were going through a landscape that to a person they found stunning. In fact, one man said after the battle, and reflecting on this area, he said there is not a square mile in North America that had seen more killing up to this time than what had happened in this area along the Orange Plank Road on May 5th and 6th. And so these soldiers were witnessing this as they retreated back through the forest here. As the retreat began, kind of sweeping this way and then that way down along this woods road, along the Orange Plank Road, it gained momentum. One man said, I said, I might as well have tried to stop a cannonball with the lid of a cracker box, he said. And so it would go. Now, Longstreet's men, of course, this was a great triumph. And I'd like to point out a parallel to you that I think is a little bit instructive for the Army of Northern Virginia. On August 30th, 1862, Longstreet launched the other great and successful attack of his career here in Virginia. Nearly destroyed a Union army. That attack and this attack, the flank attack here is a much smaller sort of thing. But in both cases, they turn the left flank of the Union Army, and then they face a final concerted effort to overrun the Union Army in its final position. And in fact, the similarities are so great that almost exactly the same troops on the Confederate side are involved in the final attacks, both at Manassas and both here. So these men had been in this situation before. And not only that, the same men, mostly Georgians, who had been in that situation at Second Manassas, had fought in deep woods, much like this. Absent the fire, of course. But one of the characteristics of Lee's army, and one of the characteristics of both of the attacks by Longstreet, both at Second Manassas and here at the Wilderness, is just an inability to have that final push those numbers of men, that bit of organization that was required to turn a victory into something truly decisive. And of course, in both instances, at 2nd Manassas and here, the Union Army would ultimately escape. And I'll offer this comment about Longstreet. Of course, we like to see moments like Longstreet's wounding as a decisive one. But if you look pretty carefully at this battle and the situation that Longstreet had in his mind, conceived this flank attack, this renewed flank attack by going again to the unfinished railroad and going across the Brock Road and trying to cut off the Union flank along the Brock Road, that's a pretty ambitious idea. And I would offer that even had Longstreet lived, he would have had a very difficult time reorganizing his men and troops to make that happen. As we shall see, moving troops and moving ourselves through these woods is no small challenge. Communicating through these woods is no small challenge. So while we like to see Longstreet's wounding as a decisive moment, and maybe it was, I would suggest that maybe we consider the circumstances on the ground. Longstreet was not a magician. And the task of putting a command in order to launch this attack here on this ground, on this day, would have been a challenge for anyone. And I'm not entirely sure that Longstreet's wounding is perhaps as decisive as we'd like to imagine that it was. Elizabeth, got anything? I don't know where she is. Did she leave us? You got anything? Okay, onward. Since this wonderful road, this is one of the most evocative resources that we have. This path that we're following, it is a wartime road, parallels the Orange Plank Road, and many men mention it during their trek through the wood. And I found an account, a man in the 74th New York, the Excelsior Brigade, which was just down yonder, and was near the peach orchard, of course, at Gettysburg, if that's your point of reference, as it is for many people. And he wrote during this Union retreat after Longstreet's flank attack, passing over this ground, when our brigade had reached a cart road, remember, he's coming diagonally in this direction, when our brigade had reached a cart road which ran off diagonally through the woods from the Brock Road, Major Finkelmeyer, our Assistant Adjutant General, called out, "Now men, halt and give them one volley." The men halted on the road and faced in the direction from which we had come. But many of our men still in the woods were ordered not to fire. We followed the road down in the direction of the breastworks and found an opening in the works through which we passed. At the opening stood General Hancock, looking, so to speak it mildly, very indignant. He saluted us with, get in behind the works here. Damn you. You officers are a damn sight worse than the men. There was no panic, but much confusion. So that's the scene on this road, probably and very close to this place where we are right now.
All right, just to test one more time, everybody can hear me? Mm-hmm. Yes, excellent. So, in picking up somewhat where we left off, we've moved so far since John's last stop in the footsteps of Confederate soldiers sort of forming up for our attack around 4 p.m. Here, about where we're standing is essentially their step-off point. And now for those of you, how many of you were with Greg and I yesterday at 5 to 7 p.m. tour? Okay, good number of you. Take a good look around. You might recognize it, or you might have seen our flagging from yesterday, marking our stop. Right behind most of you, off closer to the road, between us and the road, is the hop pole forest that we discussed last time. So keep in mind that this ground that the Confederates are walking over has already been hotly contested the day before. And that description of most of those trees being cut down by, those very thin trees being cut down by small arms fire, has already taken place. So imagine the harrowing scene that these Confederates are walking through as they begin to form up for the attack. they're already looking at the devastation of one fight, one very heavy fight that their men did not necessarily come out of so well, and they're about to launch into another one. I have a feeling that that is not the best sight to meet their eyes for their own morale as they move forward. But at about 4:15 p.m., 150 years ago today, Lee's men will be forming up again right about where we're standing on this high ground that was formerly occupied by the Vermont Brigade the day before, preparing to move forward in this frontal assault. So if you take a look at your map, the May 6th afternoon final attack on the Brock Road, you should see where we come from the site of Longstreet's wounding, heading down. Those of you who are on this end of the group can probably see the Vermont Monument off in the distance if you're looking for markers. And again, we're on that thin woods road that you see labeled. If you want to hold your maps oriented, take the May 6th afternoon final attack text and hold it this way and have your map kind of long ways so that the plank road is facing the traffic and the Brock Road is up ahead. But going forward, these men are looking at, again, a devastated landscape. Every tree, as one man wrote, had a bullet through it from the hard fighting that had just gone on there, causing these white oak runners to bend down from being top-heavy. These bullets all seemed to go through about the height of a man's waist. In tumbling down, they made an almost impossible barrier. Together with this obstacle, the dead and dying were so thick that we could not help stepping on them. And again, this is the scene as these men move forward. They're going to charge forward through these woods, of course with the famous rebel yell, in a normal line of battle, straight into the teeth of the Union defense. Union forces in the breastworks, watching the oncoming attack, were somewhat taken aback. One man, Charles Meyerhoff, wrote, "The coming host was more fearful than a hurricane. When within 150 yards, they rushed and yelled, and when within 100 yards, then came the shock of battle. Great God," was the exclamation of many, holding their breath.
Did you get a bug?
Charles Meyerhoff is describing the feelings of these men as they're watching the Confederate attack unfolding in front of them. And keep in mind how he finishes what he just wrote there. Great God was the exclamation of many, holding their breath. How would you feel as you're rushing into battle here, or as you're watching men come at you? Note that Meyerhoff is describing really a transition. So we often think, well, you've got to have one feeling that's most likely fear that's rising to the top. But it's really some form of almost exuberance that shifts to desperation, and then men beginning to sort of brace themselves for the impact, recognizing that they actually need to hold their breath because they see the onrushing Confederates. It's a very interesting idea because we often think of men in the midst of fighting, but what happens, excuse me, as they're watching men come at them. At this point, I'm sorry, we're going to do something that is not going to help my pollen situation whatsoever. I would like to use you all as a bit of a demonstration to better understand what the impact of these woods would have on the Confederates attempting to form up in an assault. So we think of this again as a large frontal assault, and so usually when you have a frontal assault, you're going to line your men up into a very long row, usually 2 ranks deep, and move forward in a line. How many of you think we can move forward in a line through the woods? Again, no volunteers I see. But if you all are willing to participate, and some of you I understand and completely may not be, feel free, if you're not willing to participate in this, to just stay on the road. Anyone who would like to join us in forming up shoulder to shoulder and seeing how far we can make it, we will not go very far because we simply won't make it very far. And also we don't want to run over things and get too lost. But I do think it's an important exercise for us to better understand what the Confederates are facing as they move forward. So, John is going to take the far end here.
You guys this is about the size of a typical regiment in either army. Probably about 220, 250 people right now. Now the line's a little bit longer because this end is in a single line of battle while you guys are in double ranks, yes? Okay, so they're actually doing it right. I take responsibility, we're doing this wrong down here. But you get an idea of what a line of probably about 500 men, this is about the stance that it would have covered, maybe a little bit less than that. All right, you want to go how far, Beth?
Till we get stuck.
Okay. Forward! Hard!
Watch back. Okay.
Way easier being an officer. 1, 2, 1. Hey, stop! Stop! Don't move! Don't move! Everybody stay where they are! So we got a big gap down here. You guys are a mess. What's the gate from? You guys are dragging a little bit over here. Okay, reform your rank so they're proper.
Let's do a right wheel, Beth.
Come on, be better.
You go ahead and lead that.
Find your places in line. Try to make it look good. Right. Guy to the right. Forward, march.
1, 2, 1.
Hey, halt! Stop where you are! Stop where you are! Look down here, there's a huge hole in the line there. That would be dangerous if expanded. Here you've got a down tree that's causing all sorts of problems. Now we do concede that the Confederates, thank God, were better at this than you are. But it's still a difficult thing to do, as you can see. Do you want to go to the Vermont Monument and stop? Sure. Okay, forward, go!
Also keep in mind this is the tangled mess. Especially well back here. I don't like this at all.
To make a point in really how difficult this is. Now, as I said, thank goodness the Confederates were way better at this than you were, else the Confederacy would have lasted a lot less than it had. But it is a difficult matter for sure. Before we get going again, you notice that the speaker thing is always a little bit late coming to the front. The guy carrying it is Tom Clemens. I don't know if any of you have heard of Tom Clemens, but Tom Clemens is a historian from Hagerstown, Maryland, who is also probably the nation's foremost authority on George B. McClellan, which explains why he's always late.
You notice he's coming in reach now.
That's why we trust you with the equipment.
I think it's only fair to ask Tom, do you have a rebuttal to this?
Yeah,
Can you say it to the public?
probably not.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. All right. So as John said, we did that, of course, for a purpose. How many of you feel like you would be able to, especially under fire, to keep any kind of organization under those sort of circumstances?
No.
One person. All right, we have one brave soul who thinks that she can keep herself in order as we move forward. So some could. And the Confederates, although they had a lot of struggle in moving forward, they are able to launch this attack and to make the distance that we just traveled and actually a little bit more. But as they rush toward the works, they're going to face some pretty stiff resistance. From the Union perspective, we have a man who wrote, "The afternoon's attack was preceded by a sudden, tremulous rustling of the leaves and boughs in the woods in front." I think you all are familiar with that sound. Long before the enemy could be seen, which sounded like a mighty rushing wind, and I presume it was magnified by the condition of our nerves. And for the instant, every man in the ranks behind the breastwork seized his gun and started for the rear. That's not a good sign. The Confederates haven't even reached the Union lines, and the Union forces are already considering running to the rear. Again, sort of the after effects of the demoralized state they were in from Longstreet's flank attack. But anyway, seized his gun and started for the rear, and only by the most strenuous exertions on the part of the officers was a rout prevented. So we see here in the Union lines, just up ahead of us, the thin line between courage and cowardice. The breastworks that they have formed and have been reinforcing help greatly in keeping the men here, as does the presence of the officers. But both of those elements really only go so far. And so we asked sort of a similar question that we asked a few stops ago about how long does your patriotism last? But at what point have you just had enough and it's time to go to the rear? But what is keeping these men in place but their own resolve, hopefully a little bit of that renewed patriotism that they've been able to gather up in the ensuing hours as they sort of gather their courage. But we have some interesting Confederate units moving forward. One of them that I would like to note is Micah Jenkins's brigade. Brigadier General Micah Jenkins was shot in the same volley that wounded James Longstreet. So you can imagine that Jenkins's brigade, which is maybe 50 yards or so to our collective right, to the south, is seeking to avenge Micah Jenkins and his death. And so they are out in front. They're going to be leading this attack in many ways, not only in their fervor, but also quite physically. One man, newspaper correspondent Charles Page on the scene, wrote that this attack was the most wicked assault thus far encountered. Brief in duration, but terrific in power and superhuman momentum. As the Confederates get to within 30 yards of the works, they're going to drop to their knees because of the amount of fire that they're taking from the Union lines. They are unable to gain much of an advantage at all. The Union forces here are very firmly entrenched. I mentioned that we have a line of works along the Brock Road, and that they have only been improved in the ensuing time. A man from the 124th New York wrote, "The rapid fire of the foe had but slight effect on our line, behind its bulletproof cover, over the top of which we, with deliberate aim, hurled into their exposed but unwavering line an incessant and most deadly fire. Again and yet again did their shattered regiments in our front close on their colors, while fresh troops from the rear moved up and filled the gaps." So as John was continuing to try to get us to do to fill in our gaps as we move forward. But note even in this account from this 124th New Yorker, a touch of admiration in his words. He is admiring the courage of these Confederate attackers to continue, even in the face of such resistance, even though they can't get really any closer than about 30 yards from the breastworks, that they continue to fight. They continue to move on. They continue to try to, again, close on their colors, as he writes. But the Union earthworks, quite simply, are the game changer here. They determined that the Confederate forces really cannot get any closer. But as our demonstration showed, for the Confederates here, the wilderness is going to be working against them almost as much as the Federals, or as the Federal forces defending are. Robert E. Lee is going to have a lot of trouble trying to bring his forces here to bear. So whereas a large frontal assault sweeping through an open field could make probably a lot better time, stay far better organized, these men are struggling in the woods, as we ourselves struggled in the woods. So the wilderness that initially was enticing to Lee to want to keep to pin Grant down in the wilderness, to make his fewer numbers less of a disadvantage, it cuts both ways. Because here, as he's trying to lead this assault, not personally, but as he's sending this assault forward, he finds that his men are unable to get too much advantage because of the very woods that he was trying to use as an advantage. The attack here had been going for about a half an hour, and the Confederates advancing and then bogging down out in front of the works, when another element of the wilderness strikes. And that is perhaps the most famous aspect of the Battle of the Wilderness, the brush fires that began. So John mentioned a little bit of the environmental conditions here. It had been a dry spring, and so the conditions were perfect, really, if you're going to mix a dry spring and an awful lot of firepower together for forest fires to spring up. And so a brush fire starts out here in the wilderness in advance of the works, and then a strong wind is going to blow it towards the Union line. As one man wrote, a strong wind suddenly sprang up and carried the fire to our log breastworks, along which the flames spread with wonderful rapidity. Several regiments to the left of the 124th abandoned the works, though several individual members of these commands remained until their hair was singed. Presently, huge clouds of strong black pine smoke, such as almost eats one's eyes out, rolled over and completely enveloped our regiment. So this brush fire catches and moves directly toward the Union works. We've already tested your patriotism with a very demoralizing Confederate attack. Now you're facing yet another strong Confederate attack to your front, and now your breastworks have caught fire. What are you going to do? Most of these men have a pretty ready answer to that, and that is get out of there. But so we're going to then follow the Confederates, who are going to follow up on that advantage as the Union forces evacuate. Is that done?